I could feel his gaze. It was not just the look of my stepfather, it was something more. I realized it when his hands touched my shoulders. A warm, long touch that seemed too intimate, but I didn't know it yet. It was just the beginning. I wasn't sure what I expected when I stepped off the bus and onto the familiar sidewalk leading to my mother's house. After the breakup, I had no place else to go. I was lost, emotionally drained, and the thought of being alone in my small apartment made me feel even worse. It felt like everything in my life had crumbled, and coming home seemed like the only option left. Mom greeted me with open arms, her eyes full of concern. She had always been my safe space, the one person who could make everything feel right again. But things had changed since I left. The house no longer felt like my home. It wasn't just the absence of my dad. He had passed away a few years ago, but it was the presence of Anatoly, my mom's new husband. He had come into our lives after my father's death and quickly settled into his role as my stepfather. Anatoly was a good man, at least he appeared to be. He was kind, attentive, and always tried to be understanding. But to me, he was a stranger, someone who had no place in my life. He worked as a massage therapist, often working from home, and that gave him plenty of opportunities to spend time in the house. I had never paid much attention to him until now, but his constant presence made me uncomfortable. It wasn't that I disliked him, I just didn't know how to navigate this new dynamic. As I stepped into the house, my mom immediately led me to the living room and sat me down. "How are you doing, honey? I know it's been tough with everything that happened," she said gently, offering me a comforting smile. "I'm okay, just trying to figure things out," I replied, forcing a smile. I hadn't been okay for a while, but I wasn't sure how to say it out loud. Anatoly walked in a moment later, his tall figure filling the doorway. He smiled at me, but his gaze lingered a little longer than I was used to. "Hey, Maya, it's good to have you back," he said with warmth in his voice. I nodded, offering a polite smile, but I felt that awkwardness creeping in. His gaze, while friendly, felt different now. It wasn't the way he used to look at me before, when I was just his wife's daughter. It was almost as if there was something more to it, something I couldn't quite place. I quickly pushed the thought aside. It was probably just my mind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. Maybe it was because I had grown up, or maybe it was because of the emotional state I was in after the breakup. Regardless, I was back under their roof for the time being, and I had to get used to it. Over the next few days, I tried to settle back into life at home. My mom was constantly trying to help me adjust, making sure I felt comfortable, but Anatoly's attention seemed to grow in small, subtle ways. He would offer me massages after long days of studying, something he had never done before. It seemed innocent enough at first, just a kind gesture from a man who wanted to help his stepdaughter relax. But as he insisted more, something started to feel off. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at university, I finally agreed to let him give me a massage. He set up his massage table in the living room, dimmed the lights, and asked me to lie down. I hesitated for a moment but eventually complied. I had always been uncomfortable with massages in the past, but this time, I thought it might help ease the tension in my muscles. As he began working on my shoulders, I could feel the usual relief, but there was an unfamiliar weight in the air. The touch was the same as last time, professional, yet somehow lingering. I tried to ignore it and focused on the relief the massage was supposed to bring. But the more he worked, the more I couldn't ignore the growing discomfort in my chest. His hands moved with precision, but there was something in the way he touched me that felt too deliberate, too personal. I kept my eyes closed, trying to focus on anything other than what was happening. The sound of his hands on my skin was all I could hear, and the longer I lay there, the more I felt myself succumbing to this strange, overwhelming pull toward him. It wasn't just his touch, it was everything. The way he spoke to me, the way he looked at me. Every small gesture seemed to carry more weight now. When the session was over, I lay there for a moment, my mind racing. I wanted to thank him and leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. It wasn't just the physical sensation, it was the way I felt about the situation. There was an underlying unease, a feeling that this moment wasn't as innocent as I wanted it to be, but I couldn't exactly pinpoint why. "How do you feel now?" Anatoly's voice broke through my thoughts. I nodded, offering a weak smile. "Better, thank you." He smiled back, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach churn. It was as if he had done something more than just relieve my muscle tension. "Anytime, Maya. You know I'm always here if you need me." I forced myself to stand up and walk away, but the words lingered in my mind. I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us, even though nothing had happened. The rest of the evening passed quietly. My mom and I had dinner, but I couldn't stop thinking about the massage. It wasn't just the physical touch that bothered me, it was the subtle shift in the way he looked at me, the way his hands lingered a little too long. I didn't know where things were going, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. Over the next few days, I tried to push the unsettling feeling to the back of my mind. I wanted to focus on getting back to my normal routine: school, studying, and adjusting to being back home after the breakup. But it seemed like every time I turned around, Anatoly was there, offering more than just the casual kindness I was used to. His presence seemed to be everywhere, and his attention, while still subtle, was becoming harder to ignore. I couldn't quite pinpoint what bothered me. It wasn't that he was doing anything outright inappropriate. It was more the way his actions made me feel. A simple gesture, a lingering touch, a comment that seemed a little too personal, each moment chipped away at my ability to feel at ease. Anatoly continued offering massages after long days, and though I hesitated, I eventually started accepting them. At first, it was just a way to relieve the stress that had built up over weeks of emotional turmoil. But soon, I found myself almost expecting them, as though I had become reliant on his attention. One evening, after a particularly tiring day of classes and assignments, I was sitting on the couch, mentally exhausted, when Anatoly walked in and asked, "Maya, would you like another massage? You look like you could use one." His voice was soft, almost too soft, and I felt a twinge of discomfort that I couldn't shake. But I was tired, physically drained, and it didn't seem like a big deal. Maybe it would help me relax, I thought. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. He set up the massage table again, and I laid down, already feeling that familiar sense of unease. He began with my shoulders, his hands moving methodically over the muscles, but this time, it felt different. The tension in my body wasn't the only thing I was aware of now. It was the way his touch lingered, the way his hands seemed to pause just a fraction longer than necessary. "Are you doing okay?" Anatoly asked, his voice low, almost coaxing. "Yeah, it's fine," I said quickly, trying to sound normal, but I could feel my heart rate quicken. I wasn't sure what was happening, but something about the situation made me feel exposed, vulnerable. Every touch felt too deliberate, too personal. As his hands moved lower along my back, I tried to focus on my breathing, to ignore the growing sense of discomfort. But his touch didn't help me relax anymore. It felt like every stroke of his hands was a reminder of the space between us that had shrunk in a way I wasn't ready to accept. It wasn't just a massage, it felt like something more, but I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't know how to put it into words. "Are you sure you're all right?" Anatoly's voice broke through my thoughts again, softer this time, his hands lingering as they slid over my spine. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I was afraid my voice would betray me if I said anything more. I didn't know if it was just my imagination, but his touch felt more intimate than it had before. Each stroke seemed to pull me further into this strange, unspoken tension between us. My mind was racing with thoughts I couldn't quite control, and I struggled to keep my emotions in check. Finally, he finished, and I quickly got up, trying to shake off the overwhelming feeling of being exposed. "Thanks," I said, my voice sounding more strained than I had intended. "Anytime, Maya," he replied, his gaze following me as I stood up. There it was again, the way his eyes lingered on me a moment too long. I could feel the weight of his stare, like he was seeing something I wasn't prepared for him to see. It was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play. I didn't want to make it awkward. He was my mom's husband, and I didn't want to do anything that might cause tension between us. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the growing discomfort every time we interacted. There was no denying that something had changed between us. The line between what was normal and what was not was blurring, and I didn't know how to stop it. The rest of the evening passed in silence. My mom and I had dinner, and I tried my best to keep the conversation light, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I couldn't stop replaying the massage, the way Anatoly's touch had felt, the way his eyes seemed to search me for something more than just a stepdaughter. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if I just confronted him about it. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I didn't want to make things worse, especially when I didn't even fully understand what was happening myself. All I knew was that the distance between us was shrinking, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. A few days passed, and I tried my best to go back to my normal routine. The constant tension between Anatoly and me had been gnawing at my nerves, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Every interaction seemed more loaded than the last, but I was trying to ignore it. The massages had become routine, and while I was still uneasy about them, I convinced myself that it was just a way to help me relax. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. It was something more. Then one afternoon, something happened that I wasn't expecting. I was sitting on the couch, lost in thought, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there he was, Anatoly, standing on the doorstep with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. "These are for you," he said, his voice warm, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach tighten. "I thought they might brighten your day a little." I stared at the flowers for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. I had never received flowers from him before. In fact, I had never received anything like this from any man in my life, except for the occasional gift from past boyfriends. But from Anatoly? It felt wrong, out of place. "Thank you," I finally managed to say, my voice sounding awkward even to my own ears. I took the flowers from him and felt his gaze linger on me just a little longer than was comfortable. "You're welcome," he said, smiling at me. "I just wanted to do something nice." I forced a smile back, feeling more confused than ever. Was this just a friendly gesture? I didn't know how to interpret it. Anatoly didn't leave right away. He stood there for a moment, his eyes studying me with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably on my feet. "How are you doing, Maya?" he asked. "I know things have been difficult with the breakup. If you ever need to talk or if you need anything, you know I'm here for you." His voice was kind, but there was an edge to it that made me uneasy. It wasn't just concern, it was something deeper, something unspoken. I'm okay," I said quickly, trying to push the unease aside. "Thanks for the flowers." Anatoly gave me one last lingering look before he turned to leave, his steps heavy as he walked away. I closed the door behind me and stood there, the flowers still in my hands. I felt a strange knot in my chest, like something wasn't quite right. His actions were becoming more personal, more intimate, and it left me with a sense of discomfort I couldn't ignore. Later that evening, as I sat at the dinner table with my mom, I tried to focus on the conversation, but all I could think about were the flowers. And then, just as I thought I had put the moment out of my mind, Anatoly surprised me again. It was after dinner when he came to find me. He was holding a small gift-wrapped box in his hands. "Maya, I got something for you," he said, almost casually. "I thought you might like it." I stared at the box, the same feeling of unease settling back into my stomach. What was going on? Why was he being so thoughtful? It wasn't like him to do these things for me. Or maybe it was. But why did it feel so off? I took the box from him, still unsure how to react. "You really didn't have to do this," I said, trying to sound appreciative, though my voice betrayed me. He smiled at me again, a soft, almost sad smile. "I wanted to. I know you've been going through a lot, and I just want to make sure you're all right. You're part of this family, Maya." I nodded, my mind racing. I opened the box slowly, the anxiety building inside me with every second. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, with a small butterfly charm attached to it. It was beautiful, but something about it felt too personal, too intimate. I stared at the bracelet for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful." Anatoly seemed pleased with my response, though his smile lingered just a little longer than necessary. "I'm glad you like it. I know it's not much, but I thought it might brighten your day." I nodded, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. This wasn't just a gift. It wasn't just a simple act of kindness. It was something more, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. Later that night, as I sat in my room, I looked at the bracelet again. I had no idea what to make of any of this. Anatoly had always been kind to me, but this was different. It felt like he was trying to get closer, to cross a line that I wasn't ready to acknowledge. And the worst part was that I didn't know how to stop it. I knew I should talk to my mom about it, but I couldn't bring myself to do that either. What if I was overreacting? What if it was all in my head? I didn't want to cause unnecessary tension between us, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the way Anatoly's behavior was making me feel. As the days passed, the unease only grew. Every time he smiled at me or offered another gift or compliment, I felt more and more trapped. It was as if he was inching closer and closer to something that neither of us should be crossing. I wasn't sure how to stop it, but I knew one thing for certain. Things between us couldn't go on like this. The days were beginning to feel like they were all blending together. I couldn't focus on my studies the way I needed to, and every time I saw Anatoly, it felt like the space between us had shrunk just a little bit more. I kept telling myself that I was overthinking things, that he was just trying to be a good stepfather and help me through a tough time. But the reality was that I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room, still trying to focus on a textbook in front of me, Anatoly walked in. He was carrying a jacket, as though he were about to head out, but he stopped when he saw me. "Maya," he said, his voice soft but somehow filled with an unfamiliar undertone. "It's such a nice night outside. Why don't we go for a walk? It might help you clear your head. You've been cooped up in here for days." I hesitated. I didn't want to spend time alone with him. Not because I didn't like him. I just couldn't ignore the tension that was always there now. But at the same time, I realized I had been cooped up for too long. Maybe a walk would help, and maybe, just maybe, it would give me some space to think clearly. "Okay," I agreed, standing up slowly. "A walk sounds good." Anatoly smiled at me, and for a brief moment, I saw that same glint in his eyes, the one that sent a shiver down my spine. But he quickly masked it with his usual calm demeanor. He handed me the jacket, and together we walked out the door and into the cool evening air. We walked for a while in silence, the sounds of the neighborhood around us filling the space between us. The breeze was gentle, and the sky above us was clear, with just the slightest hint of twilight. But despite the peaceful surroundings, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. After a few minutes, Anatoly broke the silence. "You know, Maya," he began, his voice unusually gentle. "I can't imagine how hard things have been for you lately. It's not easy dealing with a breakup, especially when everything else seems to be falling apart." I glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, it's been tough," I said quietly, my voice betraying more emotion than I intended. "It's hard to know what to do next." He nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. It's important to take time for yourself, to heal." He paused for a moment, and then his voice grew even softer. "And I want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you, Maya. I always will be." I stopped walking, my heart racing. I didn't know how to react to his words. He was my stepfather, for God's sake. He shouldn't be saying things like that. I could feel the unease building up inside me again, like a knot tightening in my chest. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice tight. "But I don't think you understand how difficult it is." He stepped closer, his presence suddenly more intense. "I do understand, Maya," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "I've been through tough times too, and sometimes it helps to have someone who's willing to listen, someone who cares." There was a slight tremor in his voice, and I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but it felt like his words were laden with something more. I took a step back, trying to create some space between us. The warmth of his body was too close, and it made my heart race even faster. "I'm fine," I said quickly, my voice shaky. "I really don't need anything from you." I didn't want to say those words, but it felt like they had to be said. There was a part of me that was afraid that if I didn't push him away now, I wouldn't be able to stop it from going any further. I needed to establish boundaries, even if I didn't know how. Anatoly didn't move. Instead, he stood still for a moment, staring at me with that same intensity. Then, just as quickly as the tension had appeared, it seemed to dissipate. He sighed softly and looked down at the ground for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said quietly, his voice returning to a more neutral tone. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I nodded, unable to speak. I didn't know how to respond. How could I explain to him that his presence, his words, were making me feel more and more uneasy? How could I tell him that something had shifted in our relationship, something I wasn't prepared for and didn't know how to handle? We continued walking in silence after that, but it wasn't the same as before. The distance between us felt like an unspoken weight, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break, something I wasn't ready for. When we finally returned home, I didn't want to look at him, didn't want to acknowledge the way his gaze had lingered on me. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my stomach, and the more I thought about the walk, the more I realized just how much things had changed. I didn't know what to do anymore. My mind was spinning, and the only thing I was sure of was that I needed to put more distance between us. But could I? And would it be enough? The following days passed by in a blur. I tried to keep my distance from Anatoly, but it seemed impossible. Every time I turned around, he was there, always offering his help, always making sure I was okay. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate his kindness, it was the way his attention felt too intense, too much for me to handle. I couldn't avoid him forever, though. Eventually, I had to face the reality that things were not going to go back to the way they had been before. There was an unspoken tension that neither of us seemed able to shake, and with every passing day, it only grew stronger. One afternoon, I was sitting on the couch, trying to finish an assignment, when Anatoly walked in. He stopped in the doorway and looked at me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Maya, how are you feeling today?" he asked, his voice soft, as usual. I looked up from my work, my heart skipping a beat as I met his gaze. "I'm fine," I said quickly, forcing myself to sound calm. But inside, I was anything but fine. The constant attention, the gifts, the massages, it was all starting to suffocate me. Anatoly took a few steps into the room and stood just a little too close for comfort. "You don't have to pretend with me, Maya," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I can see that you're struggling, and I want to help you. I don't want you to feel alone." I felt my chest tighten. The way he said it, it wasn't just a simple offer of support. There was something more in his tone, something that made my stomach churn. I knew what he was implying, and I didn't know how to stop it from going further. "I'm not pretending," I replied, my voice shaky despite my efforts to remain composed. I'm fine, okay?" Anatoly didn't back off. Instead, he took another step closer, until he was standing right next to me. His presence was overwhelming, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, "you don't have to keep everything inside. You don't have to push me away." I froze. My heart was racing now, and I could feel the familiar sense of panic rising in my chest. This wasn't right. None of this was right. And yet, despite the warning signs in my mind, I couldn't bring myself to push him away. I was too stunned, too caught up in the moment, to do anything. His hand moved slightly, brushing against my arm, and it felt like a jolt of electricity went through me. It wasn't the touch of a father or a stepfather. It was the touch of someone who was trying to cross a line that shouldn't be crossed. I don't know what you mean," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to get through this. I don't need your attention." Anatoly paused for a moment, his hand lingering in the air before he slowly lowered it. His expression shifted, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't disappointment. It was something else, something darker. "You don't need me," he repeated softly, almost as if he were testing the words, rolling them around in his mind. The tension in the room felt suffocating. I tried to turn my body slightly, creating just a bit more space between us, but Anatoly didn't move. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing something deeper, something that I wasn't ready to reveal. "I don't know what's happening between us," I said, my voice shaking now. "But I don't want this. I can't deal with this." Anatoly's gaze softened, but there was still something in his eyes, a hunger that made me feel trapped. "Maya, I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice suddenly calm, but there was an edge to it. "But you need to understand that I'm here for you. I've always been here for you." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him to leave me alone, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as the seconds ticked by. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until I could no longer stand it. "I'm going to my room," I finally said, my voice small. I stood up quickly, avoiding his eyes as I moved toward the hallway. But before I could leave, Anatoly reached out and gently grabbed my arm, his fingers tightening just enough to stop me in my tracks. "Maya," he said, his voice almost pleading, "please, don't shut me out." His touch was like a weight pressing down on me. I wanted to pull away, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't make myself move. It was like everything inside me had gone numb. "Please," he repeated, and for a moment, I almost believed him. I almost believed that this was just some twisted form of concern. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just concern. This was something else entirely. I pulled my arm away sharply, finally breaking free of his grip. I didn't say anything else. I didn't have to. I just turned and hurried toward my room, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't process fast enough. I slammed the door behind me, locking it and sliding down against it, my body shaking. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, and I knew that there was no going back now. Things were never going to be the same again. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. The events of the past week had left me on edge, my nerves stretched thin. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted permanently between Anatoly and me. Every interaction, every glance, felt charged with an intensity that left me feeling exposed, like I was teetering on the edge of something I wasn't ready for. It had been several days since the last encounter, but Anatoly hadn't backed off. If anything, his presence seemed even more constant. He was always there, offering me help, offering his company, his attention. I couldn't escape him, and I couldn't escape the tension between us. That evening, after another long day, I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on a book. I had to keep my mind busy, otherwise, it would start wandering to places I didn't want to go. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard the door open. Anatoly walked in, his footsteps quiet, his gaze focused on me. "Maya," he said softly, his voice low. I know you've been avoiding me, but I need to talk to you. I froze. My heart raced. I couldn't make myself look at him. I couldn't look at him and pretend everything was normal anymore. But I also knew I couldn't avoid this conversation forever. What is it? I asked, my voice sounding more distant than I wanted it to. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. We need to talk about what's happening between us, he said, his voice full of tension. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine. You can't keep pushing me away. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Every word he spoke seemed to make the situation worse. It was as if he was finally admitting that something more was happening, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to remain calm. I haven't been pushing you away. I don't know what to say anymore. Anatoly took a step closer, and I instinctively moved back. The air between us felt thick, charged with a tension I wasn't prepared to confront. You don't have to say anything, he said, his voice lowering even more. I just need you to understand that I care about you, Maya, more than you think. I stepped back again, my back hitting the armrest of the couch. This isn't right, I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. This isn't what I wanted. You're my stepfather. He didn't flinch, didn't back away. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that took my breath away. That doesn't change how I feel about you, Maya. I've always cared for you, but lately, it's been harder to ignore these feelings. My heart pounded in my chest. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get out of there. But my body was frozen, my thoughts tangled in confusion and fear. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. You can't feel this way, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, panic rising in my chest. You're married to my mom. I know, he said, his voice trembling slightly, though his gaze remained unwavering. But the heart doesn't always follow the rules, Maya. You have to understand that. I can't stop feeling this way, no matter how much I try. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make this stop. I was suffocating, trapped in this moment, in this space between us. Then, before I knew it, he was right in front of me, his hand reaching out to touch my arm. His fingers brushed lightly against my skin, and I flinched, not out of disgust but out of fear. The touch, though soft, felt like it was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I don't want to hurt you, Anatoly said softly, his voice almost pleading now. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you, no matter what. I pulled away from his touch, the space between us suddenly feeling miles wide. Stop, I whispered urgently, the panic flooding me now. Please stop. But his hand didn't move, and he didn't step back. His gaze softened for a moment, but there was something darker in it too, something I couldn't understand, something I wasn't ready to face. Maya, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, we don't have to talk about this right now. I don't want to push you. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, always. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying to ignore the way my body reacted to his words. The way his presence, his touch, made everything feel more complicated than it had to be. I stood up abruptly, backing away from him. I need to go to my room, I said, my voice trembling. Anatoly didn't stop me this time. He didn't say anything more. I ran to my room, closing the door behind me and locking it. I could feel my pulse racing, my hands shaking as I sank down to the floor, my back against the door. This wasn't just about a massage or a gift anymore. This wasn't just about misplaced feelings. It was about something far darker, something I wasn't prepared to deal with. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't ignore it any longer. But no matter how much I wanted to escape, I couldn't escape the truth. Things had already gone too far. There was no going back.